Greetings, people. We at it again. We are talking to our, I think he's red-headed, red-headed bearded friend here again. Fedora Linux versus OpenSUSE. What is best for you? And I like these. I like every time people talk about OpenSUSE. Why? OpenSUSE and Fedora is probably the two distributions I have the most experience with. So I love when people are talking about OpenSUSE because I feel a lot of people are not understanding OpenSUSE. They have a wrong, maybe not a wrong, but a misinformed opinion about OpenSUSE. To some extent the same with Fedora. Let's go into the video here from our good friend TechHut here.
Hello everybody, this is TechHut. In this video, what we're going to be doing is a good old distro comparison. We're going to be comparing OpenSUSE and Fedora, two of the absolute heavyweights in the sphere of Linux distributions. And before diving into...
I would say no, Fedora is a heavyweight in the Linux distribution market. OpenSUSE not that much. As much as I love OpenSUSE, it's one of the least used distribution out there. It's probably the oldest. You know, OpenSUSE has been around since the early 90s. It was based on Slackware and then became independent. It's probably the most long run. Maybe not. If you take Red Hat may start out before OpenSUSE, so Fedora and Linux, they could be the most long run distributions. Fedora is probably used 30 times more than OpenSUSE is.
To some of the differences, we're going to talk about the one thing that is for sure the same. And that is that these are both RPM-based distributions, meaning that their package managers will ship RPM packages, as opposed to something like Ubuntu or Debian using apt and shipping Debian packages. Other than that though, they are built completely different, so that does beg the question, which one is better for you?
That also means that some RPM packages from OpenSUSE don't work on the Fedora, and some RPM packages for Fedora don't work on the OpenSUSE. You have to think about that. Just because a distribution are using the same package manager, don't mean that you can just take any vanilla, or not vanilla, any random deb packages or RPM packages and install on your distribution. Because they may be packages, they may, the config file within the RPM package may be different. You know, they may be looking for dependencies in other packages than, a better example here is, let's say you need library Bob. And that library is being provided by libbob under Fedora. But it could be under OpenSUSE, the Bob library could be provided by libcore. So if you take the RPM package format that are looking for another package called libbob and installing it under Fedora, it will not work. It can't find libbob because under the OpenSUSE one, the package manifest or config file knows that it can get libbob in the libcore package. And it's the same with Debian-based distributions or Debian package-based distributions. You can't just take a deb file and then just expect it to work on all distributions. A lot of times they will. You can build the package to work on the under both distributions. That's what Chrome is doing with the Chrome package.
Kind of like how I'm trying to get better at coming up with sponsor segues.
Oh,
the NANDMe
man.
NX7. So let's start off with the first thing that you do, and that is actually installing your operating system. Both Fedora and OpenSUSE feature installers that were built specifically for their distribution.
I will say this. OpenSUSE's installer gives you way more control over the installation process than Anaconda does.
Fedora uses something called Anaconda, while OpenSUSE is going to be using YAS. Anaconda is pretty basic on Fedora. You basically just select your language, keyboard layout, drive, time zone, and then do just about everything else post-installation. Now, OpenSUSE, on the other hand, is completely different. The main offline image allows you to install any desktop environment between KDE, GNOME, and XFCE, as well as a generic desktop with a few server options. After doing the basic steps through...
Here it is. I think he's going into it right now. If you click booting, you can customize the boot manager to your hard content. If you click software, like I said before, security. If you click security, you get way more options than the ones you see down here. This is just the most common used things that people do that you see here. If you want to go in and use Lilo instead of Quap, you click booting up here and you can customize it like that.
Through the installer, you'll get the installation overview where you can customize whatever you want on the actual installer. For example, you can click this software link on the installer.
That's fucking amazing. 99% of people that are showing off OpenSUSE is not doing this. Massive fucking high five to TechHot for doing this. I love this.
And install whatever addition or replacement DEs you want. Easily install tools for different desktop functions as well as different server and development use cases. And easily remove things that you...
By the way, I don't know if you go into that. If you can see this little detail down here, you can go even further into selecting what you want. What he's clicking here is what OpenSUSE called packages. Oh, no, So it's pre-selected defaults that you're selecting. So when you're clicking LXDE, you're getting what OpenSUSE recommends to be installed along with LXDE. But if you click details, you can choose each individual package. You may not want this video manager or video player, but you want VLC, you can choose that. I hope you go into that also.
You don't want. You can do things like change the security, system, hardware, and network settings through this installer. And overall, this is just one
I want to hawk him right now.
of the best parts of OpenSUSE. So with that, let's talk about the release cycle of these two distributions. With Fedora, it is very simple. There's going to be a new release every 6 months or so, and that release is going to be supported for about 13 months. Fedora does have a rawhide version that lets you test the latest packages and all that, and that's in regards to Fedora Workstation. There are other additions that you can get. For example, there's Fedora Server, Fedora IoT, Fedora CoreOS, as well as Fedora Silverblue, which we've actually covered on this channel previously. OpenSUSE has multiple versions, with the primary ones being Leap and Tumbleweed. Tumbleweed is a rolling release distribution.
And Leap seems to be going out of favor for APL or ALP or what it's called, but...
Meaning once you actually install it, you never have to run a full system upgrade ever again. Instead, your packages are just going to get updated, and for the most part, these are going to be newish packages, and they're going to be slightly behind other rolling release distributions.
That's not true. Tumbleweed, at least the kernel, I have had the newest kernel coming before on Tumbleweed than on the Arch Linux. I even at one point had KDE being upgraded faster on the Tumbleweed than Arch Linux. It kinda is a little bit give and take, I think, between other rolling releases and Tumbleweed. Sometimes they are ahead, sometimes they're a little bit behind, sometimes they are a lot behind. It kinda like, depends on the package, I guess.
Such as Arch and Solus. Now, if you don't like something like that, OpenSUSE Leap is going to be perfect. It's the standard kind of point release system, with, in this case, there's going to be a minor release every year or so, and then there's going to be a major release every 3 or 4 years.
I will say this. The way that they have run Leap the last 5 or so years versus Tumbleweed. Tumbleweed is meant to be for you and me. Leap is for developers, system critical environments, servers, security stations, and Leap is more, look at it like this, if you're going to talk the Fedora Red Hat route. Leap is basically a non-branded versions of Red Hat Linux, aka CentOS, before they killed that off, and now took CentOS Steam. But Leap is basically CentOS. Leap is the same as SUSE Linux Enterprise. It's just not branded as SUSE Linux Enterprise with the same support agreements and stuff like that. You can just buy support for Leap, and then it automatically you activate the SUSE Linux Enterprise repositories, and now Leap is SUSE Linux Enterprise. Tumbleweed is more what Fedora is. It's more aggressively updated to the point that it's actually a rolling release, where Fedora is not. I don't care what you say, Fedora is not a rolling release. It's a factual incorrect that it's a rolling release. Look it up yourself. Research the fucking distribution. See what the documentation says. Anyway.
And all that's not to say that Fedora doesn't have a long-term support version, because essentially Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or RHEL, and all of the clones are basically based on Fedora, as Fedora is the upstream of all of those systems. Example, RHEL 9 is based on Fedora 34. And
again, the Fedora relationship with those distributions is the same relationship Tumbleweed has with Leap and SUSE Linux Enterprise. So Tumbleweed is the upstream for those.
Kind of like Leap, RHEL itself is going to have a new major release every 3 or 4 years, with minor releases every...
Again, that's because Leap is basically SUSE Linux Enterprise.
every 6 months. And of course, RHEL is a paid distribution. However, there is alternatives such as CentOS Stream, Alma Linux, Rocky Linux, and many other clones. And they all basically do the exact same thing. So if you kind of prefer Fedora, but you're looking at a point release structure, you could get a RHEL clone, or take another look at OpenSUSE Leap. So now let's talk about the actual desktop environments for these systems. Fedora ships with GNOME stock out of the box. And like I said, with the installation process, OpenSUSE is going to allow you to actually pick your desktop environment during install.
And during the install, if you go in and choose details, as I talked about, you can actually also choose to not install the OpenSUSE branding for set desktop environment. So you're getting vanilla desktop environments.
Whether that be Plasma, GNOME, or XFCE. But with that, KDE Plasma is going to be the default selection in the installer, and KDE...
Yeah, but KDE is not the default desktop environment for OpenSUSE. It used to be. But I think around, I can't remember the years here, but around 2015-ish, maybe sooner, maybe later, they decided to become basically a desktop agnostic distribution.
Plasma installation on OpenSUSE is absolutely phenomenal. But for this video, I went ahead and installed GNOME on OpenSUSE, so we have more of a apples to oranges comparison over a apples to bacon comparison. As of making this video, both OpenSUSE and Fedora are going to be shipping with the latest version of GNOME 42.4, and both of the GNOME desktops are almost completely stock. I do say almost though because Fedora actually ships with the background logo extension pre-installed. And it is worth mentioning that OpenSUSE Leap is going to have a slightly older software, as the latest version is going to be shipping with GNOME 4.
And this is going to be even older in a year. So this is how Leap works. It works in a TikTok manner. You kind of get a dot release every year with OpenSUSE Leap. So let's say you have 10, then you get the latest, almost the latest software and stuff like that. Then in 10.1, you don't get an updated desktop environment. The one that comes a year after. You don't get updated versions to most packages. What you are getting is that you're getting refinement, optimization, and stuff like that to those environments. 2 years after, about 2 years after, then they update the desktop environments. So in 10.2, you will get a newer version of GNOME, you'll get a newer version of Plasma, and so on and so on. A lot of people don't know this. So when you're installing Leap today, you will keep this version of GNOME. Or sometimes they change it, but for the most part, you will stick with this version of GNOME for at least 2 years before you get a newer version of GNOME.
41. In terms of applications, both came pretty bare with GNOME applications, Firefox, LibreOffice. Fedora is going to include the Fedora Media Writer, but that's really basically it for Fedora. OpenSUSE also is going to be shipping with GIMP Evolution, a couple games, LibreOffice Base, and Math, which isn't in Fedora, and of course their YAST suite of applications. It also for some reason ships GNOME Music instead of Rhythmbox, which actually does make sense because Rhythmbox kinda sucks. But what makes less sense is they ship gedit instead of the new GNOME text editor. And you can make your OpenSUSE a bit more minimal by actually removing stuff during that installation process. But with default settings, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed took up about 2 gigabytes more than just a base install of GNOME.
So, and here's again misconceptions about OpenSUSE. The lizard people are fucking crazy people sometimes, so you have to remember that what OpenSUSE is doing, or the lizard people are doing, is that they enable by default recommendations. When you look at Arch Linux and you're running the, installing a program, you see under the output for the CLI, you see recommended packages, and then you see installed, not installed. Under Tumbleweed and Leap, if you install a package, you get all of the recommended packages also. Not required, but recommended. So that your OpenSUSE install can get really fucking bloated really fast. Not necessary, but they recommend it. You can go in and tweak that in the config file. I do that. I take recommendations off because I have never had a problem just running required packets only.
With that, let's talk about some of the features that are exclusive to each one of these distributions. Fedora's biggest exclusive is Copper, which is
and OpenSUSE have an equivalent to that called OpenSUSE software.
Sort of like PPAs, but unlike PPAs, they're actually good. However, Fedora doesn't have many exclusive features compared to OpenSUSE because its goal is to be more of a pure and plain Linux distribution. OpenSUSE, on the other hand, has quite a bit of exclusives, with the main thing being YAST.
Yeah.
YAST is basically like a control center.
Again, a lot of people, they are like of the opinion or the belief system that if the lizard people gave us a GUI, or if anyone, it don't have to be lizard people, but if anyone gave us a GUI, we can't use the config files anymore. No, it's just an option. You just have another option than using the config files. Don't be afraid.
That lets you customize basically everything about the system. It can act as a package manager, edit things like grub, firewall settings, and users, and do things like set up hypervisors for your virtual machines.
And, by the way, I double tapped the spacebar there. By the way, there are actually extensions in the repositories of OpenSUSE where you can add more capabilities like VPN management if you want that, sudo management. There are so many extensions in the repository that you can install to expand the capabilities of OpenSUSE, of YAST. You can also take it away if you want to.
The real problem with this is a lot of the functions of the control panel in YAST can be done other places with a more user-friendly UI.
So a lot of the tools in there, if you're running Plasma, they're duplicated. If you're running XFCE, they are not that much duplicated. That's kind of why they have this centralized control center YAST, is because no matter what desktop environment that you are installing, it's the same. YAST is the same under each desktop environment, where Plasma has their way of configuring and administrating your system. Like you can go into systemd and stuff like that with Plasma. You can't do that easily under the XFCE control center. So depending on what desktop environment you're installing, administrating and running your Linux distribution or Linux is different. So if you have YAST, you have a centralized control center where everything stays the same, no matter what environment you're under. So yes, you will get duplicated, and yes, it frustrates the living shit out of me. My OCD just can't handle it. They want to make sure that the end user have one place to go to configure and administrate your system, and it's the same no matter what environment. If you're running i3, yes, it's the same. You get what I'm trying to say. You smart people get what I'm trying to say. Lizard people are smart people.
For example, package management, the GNOME Software Center is much easier. For creating new users, you could just use GNOME settings, partitioning, GNOME disks, and
but if you were running i3, yes, it makes sense. If you're running Sway or other, like IceVM, YAST makes sense, and that's why they made YAST. So you have this. Oh my God, looks like he's going to kick me in the face. You have this centralized, consistent UI to configure your system.
Of course, if you're in KDE, there's alternatives for the various KDE applications as well. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. I'm not the biggest fan in the world. Another thing that's kind of an exclusive to OpenSUSE is the OpenBuild Service. And I say kind of because it can build packages for other distributions.
And then it's also... So, he's kind of losing me a little bit here. It is an exclusive for OpenSUSE, meaning that it's the OpenSUSE people maintaining it. They just allow people to use it also. That's the beauty with... That's why I like OpenSUSE. They are not as much... They are more sharing, let me put it that way, than a lot of other Linux distributions are, especially Red Hat and stuff like that. They don't mind sharing their knowledge and their technologies.
And it acts like OpenSUSE as a AUR or a copper. So, speaking of
the OpenSUSE build, no, he's getting it. The OpenSUSE build system is automated. Think of it a little bit like Launchpad. It's an automated build system. Well, to build a distribution or package for distributions. OpenSUSE software is basically their version of COPR or COPR. But OpenSUSE software do have a backend that are using the OpenSUSE build system. So you are building the package under the OpenSUSE build system, just like on a Launchpad. And then it's being made into basically a PPA under the OpenSUSE software, just like with PPAs under Launchpad.
OpenBuild Service, let's go ahead and talk about packages. As mentioned earlier, both are RPM distros, but they do use different package managers. Fedora uses DNF while OpenSUSE...
You can also use DNF under OpenSUSE. It's really, really easy. You just go into the package manager and install DNF. I think you could also use Smart if you want to.
...is going to be using Zypper. Now, in my unprofessional opinion, the package managers are definitely the weakest point of both of these distributions, as both are incredibly slow.
Yeah.
Both Fedora and OpenSUSE have a very modern and stable package base, making them wonderful options if you do want that bleeding edge system. Now, Leap, however, does have a bit older package base, but it's generally modern enough, and you're not having like a Debian Red Hat situation where a lot of the packages
You will be in a year with Leap. Again, this is what he thinks, that you're getting new versions of GNOME every year. You're not.
are like 2 years old. One thing OpenSUSE does kind of do poorly though is names. They have a different naming scheme for their packages compared to other distros, so instead of installing the Firefox package, you have to install Mozilla Firefox. And yes, that is case sensitive. And with that, we're gonna have to talk about our first boot experience in both of these distributions. When you boot up Fedora, you're gonna get a couple dialogues to set some things up, such as the welcome screen with privacy options, enabling third-party repos connecting online accounts and your user account. OpenSUSE, on the other hand, has had most of everything set up in the installer, so you're just gonna get a little welcome prompt with some documentation, some links, and a button to enter the software store. Now, overall, I think I personally prefer Fedora's.
So OpenSUSE have a third-party repo called Pacman. Yeah, Pacman. And you go and enable that in the software center by enable community repositories. This is also where they have the NVIDIA drivers, the DVD drivers, and a lot of the media codecs that they can't ship for licenses reasons and stuff like that. I hope he gets into that later in the video.
Kind of workflow with this, as it makes it really easy to install Fedora on somebody else's computer and allow them to set up their user account and all that stuff kind of after the fact. But on the other hand, I do like how OpenSUSE does it with the documentation and all those links in their little welcome thing. It just kind of helps out the new user, and you can of course disable it so it doesn't show up anymore. So now let's actually talk about using these distributions. Fedora, I don't really have much to say. It's fast, it's polished, it's up to date, it's very stable, and it kind of just works. There is a reason I have made several videos absolutely praising Fedora, including calling it simply the best in my review of Fedora 36, and I recently made a video called Finally, the Perfect Premium Linux Experience, which is about Fedora. Alright, hello everybody, this is Future Brandon real quick. I was watching this and I noticed I did not say enough negatives about Fedora. It's a beautiful system, but there are things that are not perfect. Example, DNF as a package manager is simply slow. I'm not going to do any edits here. Oh, actually, that was not that bad at all. Lots of updates. This is Norbra, and I do have some customizations to make it quicker, but out of the gate, the DNF is just slow. It's as simple as that. Additionally, when you go ahead and set up Fedora for the first time, you're going to have to use RPM Fusion to get a lot of the packages that you are going to need, including video drivers. So there are some extra steps to get you up and going, and there are.
And if I'm not mistaken, I made a script to automate that for you guys. So search my videos for Fedora scripts or something like that, and you will get a link to it's like a year or so old, but they work still. I automate that shit with the bash scripting, so it's not that difficult. It's just automatically giving the version numbers of Fedora, and then you can enable all this by yourself.
Are some negatives. I just felt I would bring that up. So there's really not much for me to add because it just works. OpenSUSE, on the other hand, has had a couple of weird quirks with it. In general, OpenSUSE is stable enough, but it doesn't seem like there has been much polish built into it. In fact, I've had manual Arch installations feel a bit more polished and well put together.
So I will say this, when you're talking about polish, that's when the distribution makers are going in and messing with the packages. They are changing the themes, the fonts, making sure that everything plays nice. The less polished it is, the more vanilla it is. It's not a defense towards OpenSUSE. It's just something to remember.
Together than a typical OpenSUSE installation. For one, I couldn't get internet to work on OpenSUSE Leap in the virtual machine.
So I know why he couldn't do that. And I think that's because OpenSUSE Leap is defaulting to a network manager called Wicket. That's outdated version, not outdated, but I think it's going to be outphased. It's OpenSUSE's own network manager.
YAST network configurations, and then I went ahead and fought with YAST trying to figure out how to fix it, and that just didn't work either. Another thing I noticed is trying to change my wallpaper in Tumbleweed, there was only one pre-installed wallpaper, and
What's I'm sorry. That's a fucking stupid thing to be bitchy about, okay? I could find thousands more things to bitch about OpenSUSE with, and have done in live streams. But not enough installed wallpapers is a little bit like, I really want to be angry at this distribution, or it's like I can't find anything that's wrong with it, so let me find things to be like this. The network manager thing I can kind of agree with him on, because he it's not in your face that they're not using network manager. You know, you have to kind of read to understand, like, but this here, like, bitching and moaning about it don't have a wallpaper when you're choosing to the dark mode. You just really want to be angry at the red-headed stepchild right now.
Doesn't work in dark mode. And if only having one wallpaper is to save on bloat, why is there so many applications pre-installed? On top of that, every time I try to install...
So, it's not to do the bloat thing, and why there's so many packages installed by default is because of the recommendation, or recommend that OpenSUSE automatically install recommended packages. Like I said, it can be really bloated.
Install a package, it wouldn't work because of PackageKit running in the background. The only way to fix this was to manually kill PackageKit before trying to run the package manager.
So, another quirk with OpenSUSE. This is why they have their own software manager. You don't run PackageKit or other software manager on an OpenSUSE because it conflicts with the OpenSUSE package handler. I think this is the right word. So if you're installing GNOME software, you have to use PackageKit. PackageKit is documented to fuck up or mess up OpenSUSE's backend, package backend. They need to fix this somehow, that or at least inform the user of it.
Another thing, like I mentioned with the packages, is just the naming scheme when you have to install things through the terminal. For example, the case sensitivity in Mozilla Firefox, stuff like that.
I find that to be a little bit of a petty fucking irritation, because he used to be an Arch Linux user. I don't know if he's Arch Linux. If you're going to install Chrome under Arch Linux with the AUR, it's Google-Chrome. Not case sensitive, I don't think so. But, you know, the AUR and Arch Linux have a lot of fucking crazy fucking naming scheming, and I don't hear him bitch and moan about that. Again, I find this a little bit as a mute criticism. It's like I said, I feel a little bit that he has an axe to grind with OpenSUSE, and I think it's because he don't understand what OpenSUSE really is compared to Fedora.
Now, all of this is just generally things that would only affect you right once you first install OpenSUSE, and it wouldn't really come to bite you like some of the issues I had recently with like Ubuntu 22.04, but they're still kind of annoying and make OpenSUSE just seem more complicated and
It is, honestly, I would be the first one to say that OpenSUSE is a complicated system. But OpenSUSE is also built to be a complicated system because it's an administrator's choice, I think their slogan is.
A bad distro to a new user when it's really not. Overall, Fedora definitely wins in the just user experience department. So
that's what it's built for. It's built to just work, you know.
Overall, OpenSUSE does have a lot of unique features, especially if you're somebody who is well versed in the Linux ecosystem you're networking.
Anyway, he's just showing it off and probably recommending Fedora because he likes Fedora, and I'm cool with that. What he should have been doing here is taking Gecko Linux. Gecko Linux is based on OpenSUSE and is meant to be more a la what Fedora is. He and a lot of people don't really understand what OpenSUSE really is. Because OpenSUSE have a massive problem like almost any other Linux distribution out there. They are not good at marketing, they're not good at branding, okay? Yes, OpenSUSE and Fedora are doing a lot of the same things. They are copying each other a lot of times, but they are also kind of positioning themselves in two similar but different markets. Leap is more like a LTS version of Arch Linux. You know, it's server-oriented, stuff like that. Tumbleweed the same. It's just more like Arch Linux. You know, you have to work more to make Leap, or not Leap, but Tumbleweed as polished as, let's say, OpenSUSE, Ubuntu, Fedora, and stuff like that. And OpenSUSE is a distribution that are meant for you to make the decisions and to be the administrator to set it up as a workstation, where, well, Fedora Workstation by default is meant to be a workstation. So it's catered to the workstation work, philosophy, development stations, blah, 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 blah. You get what I'm saying here. So I think what he was expecting that, well, they are looking kind of the same on the surface. So OpenSUSE should be the same as Fedora Workstation. I would say that OpenSUSE is more like Fedora Server. It just have a nicer installation where you can choose to set it up as a workstation. So if you understand the positioning that OpenSUSE is trying to put itself in, like the administrator's choice, where Fedora Workstation is a workstation, that's its primary function, to be a workstation, where OpenSUSE's primary function is you tell me what to be. You get what I'm saying here? So that means that you have to do a little bit more tinkering, you have to do a little bit more administration, you have to do a little bit more reading. OpenSUSE is not meant to be a Ubuntu alternative. Can it be? Yes. But that's for you to make it into that. And that's why I love OpenSUSE, because OpenSUSE, in my opinion, have this perfect blend between Ubuntu and Arch. I need to tinker a lot with it in the beginning, but I can set OpenSUSE up to basically be Ubuntu and don't have to do anything with it ever again. Or I can set OpenSUSE up to be Arch Linux, where I have to tinker with it all the time. Fedora Workstation, it is what it is. So I honestly think that he missed the point about OpenSUSE. See you all later. Bye bye.